My dear, before I begin, let me take a slow breath, because this story I'm about to tell you, it's the one I kept locked inside my chest for more than 60 years. My hands may tremble as I speak, and my voice might wobble from time to time, but the truth deserves to be told, no matter how many wrinkles time has drawn on my skin. I don't know why I feel safe enough to tell it now. Perhaps because when you grow old, the fear that once held your tongue weakens, and you realize that speaking your truth is the only gift you can leave behind. You see these old eyes? They have seen winters I wish no woman would ever know. They have seen betrayals wrapped in smiles, cruelty served in the name of tradition, and silence forced upon a heart that only wanted to be loved. And perhaps that's the hardest part. Not the suffering itself, but the way you are expected to endure it quietly, gracefully, as if pain was part of your dowry. I wasn't always this old woman you see now. Once I was a young bride with bright cheeks, thin wrists, and dreams that fluttered like birds inside my chest. I believed in happy endings. I believed in loyalty. I believed that a husband's love was something sacred. But life has a way of teaching you that belief and truth are not always friends. When I married my husband, I was only 18. I still remember the sound of the wedding songs, the smell of roses in my hair, the weight of gold bangles clinking softly around my wrists. I remember the way my mother whispered into my ear, "Be patient, my child. All marriages take time." I remember the way my father placed my hand into the hand of the man who would become my greatest comfort and my greatest torment. And I remember my own heart beating so fast that I worried it might burst through my chest. In the first few months, everything felt new and confusing, but still bearable. I was learning the rhythms of a new home, learning the silences, the pauses, the eyes that watched me when they thought I wasn't looking. My husband, well, he wasn't cruel then, not yet. He wasn't gentle either, but he wasn't harsh. He spoke little, worked much, and carried a heaviness on his shoulders that I assumed was responsibility. I tried to be a good wife. I tried to please him. I tried to grow into the woman everyone expected me to be. But everything changed the day his old mother sat me down and said, in her calm, almost casual voice, "Your husband has taken a second wife. She will come here next week." I still remember how the world went silent around me. Even the wind outside paused. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because the shock froze me from the inside. A second wife? After everything I had done to be good, patient, respectful. After all the nights I stayed awake waiting for his footsteps, hoping he would talk to me, hoping he would notice the way I held on to him with all the innocence of a young girl learning to love. But it was true, and I had no choice. In those days, a woman's choices were not hers to make. You accepted. You bowed your head, you stitched the broken pieces of your heart in silence and pretended you were whole. I didn't know then that the worst days of my life had only just begun. When she arrived, I remember standing at the doorway, my palms sweating, my breath trembling. She was younger than me, prettier perhaps, confident in a way I had never been. Her eyes scanned the house, not with curiosity, but with ownership, as though she had come to claim something that already belonged to her. She looked at me with a slight smile. Not warm, not kind, but victorious. I was too naive to understand the meaning behind that smile then, but I would learn it soon enough. From the very first day, she made sure I felt like a guest in my own home. She walked into rooms as if she owned them. She spoke loudly, laughed even louder, and touched my husband's arm in front of me, making sure I saw it. And he didn't stop her. He didn't look at me to see the way my heart was breaking. He didn't say a word. I tried to stay calm. I tried to stay respectful. I told myself, "You are the first wife. You must be strong. You must take your place with dignity." But dignity is a fragile flower, my dear, and cruelty has a way of crushing it underfoot. The fights began soon after, not between her and me, but between my own heart and my own sanity. She would whisper lies about me to my husband. She would tell him I was lazy, that I was jealous, that I was ungrateful. She would take credit for things I did, and he believed her. He believed every word. One night, after a long day of chores, I overheard her telling him that I had purposely broken a vase that she liked. I hadn't. I swear on the life of my unborn child, I hadn't. But my husband didn't ask me. He didn't come to me. He didn't even give me a chance to explain. He shouted at me for the first time, and the pain of that shout was sharper than any knife. I realized then that my place in his life was shrinking so fast that I feared one day I might disappear entirely. And then, just when I thought I had reached the edge of despair, life tested me even further. I discovered I was pregnant. My first child. My first heartbeat growing beneath my heart. When I touched my belly, I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe the baby would change things. Maybe my husband would see me differently. Maybe motherhood would give me a shield against her cruelty. But I was wrong. When she found out I was expecting, she didn't congratulate me. She didn't offer help. She didn't even fake kindness. She smiled, that same cruel smile, and said, "Let's see if your child is worth all the trouble you cause." After that, the real nightmare began. I don't think I will ever forget the way she looked at me during those months. Like my pregnancy was an inconvenience to her. Like my growing belly was a reminder that she had not won completely yet. Every time I held my stomach, she watched me with eyes that felt sharp enough to cut through my skin. She made me feel unsafe in my own body. She made me feel like even the life inside me was something she wanted to control, something she wanted to overshadow. There were days when I would sit alone in the courtyard, my hands resting gently on my stomach, whispering to the baby inside me, telling him that he was wanted, that he was loved, that his mother would protect him no matter what. I didn't know whether he could hear me or not, but speaking to him gave me strength. I needed that strength because the world around me was becoming darker with every passing day. She began to twist things more cleverly. Instead of yelling or openly insulting me, she switched to quieter methods. Subtle, poisonous actions that were hard to prove, hard to explain to anybody. She would hide things and blame me. She would prepare meals and then tell the family I had refused to help. She would wait until I was exhausted and then complain loudly that I wasn't working enough. She acted like a saint in front of the elders, like a supportive, innocent woman who only wanted peace. While I was painted as the jealous, insecure wife who could not accept the new reality. And my husband became a stranger to me. He stopped talking to me gently. He stopped asking how I felt. He stopped caring whether I ate, slept, or broke down in tears. It was like every word she whispered into his ear tightened a rope around his heart, pulling him further and further away from me. It was during my 5th month that something happened, which I still remember with a cold shiver. I was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables slowly because my hands were trembling from weakness. I hadn't eaten properly for days. Nausea mixed with stress had taken away my appetite. She walked in behind me, quietly, without a sound, and stood close enough that I could feel her breath on my shoulder. I stiffened. My fingers tightened around the knife, not in aggression, but in fear. She leaned in and whispered, "Do you think this baby will keep him with you? Do you think you've won?" Her voice was soft, so soft it was more chilling than if she had shouted. "Let me tell you something," she continued. "Men stay where they are pleased, and he is pleased with me." I wanted to turn around and look at her, but I couldn't. My knees felt weak. My throat felt dry. All I could do was stand there and listen as she laid her poison gently into my ear. "Once your baby comes," she said, "you will be even more useless to him. He doesn't need a burden. He needs a woman who knows how to keep him." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. I swallowed a sob that threatened to escape and kept my eyes on the cutting board. I didn't want her to see how deeply her words had hit me. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction. But she laughed, a quiet, triumphant laugh, and walked out of the kitchen as if she had just delivered a message she had been waiting to say for months. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake with my hand on my belly, whispering to the baby that he deserved more than this. More than a mother who cried herself to sleep, more than a home filled with bitterness, more than a father who couldn't see the truth standing right in front of him. And then, slowly, things became worse. She began instructing me like I was her servant. "Wash this," she would say. "Clean that. Don't sit too much. You are just pregnant, not broken." And if I dared to rest or touch my back because of the pain, she would announce loudly, "Look at her pretending again. She uses pregnancy as an excuse for everything." I still remember one morning, my back hurting so much that I couldn't bend to sweep the floor. I had barely slept, and my muscles felt tight and heavy. She came into the room, saw me sitting on the edge of the bed, and shouted my name in a way that made me flinch. "Are you deaf? The floor is dirty. Get up." I whispered, "Give me a moment, please. I'm in pain." And her response? She marched straight to my husband, stood in front of him dramatically and said, "Your first wife has become lazy. She's using the baby as her shield. You should talk to her." He stormed into the room, his face hard, and shouted at me for being disrespectful and careless. I tried to explain, but he didn't listen. He never listened anymore. He walked out, and I felt something inside me crumble. It was around this time that the loneliness became unbearable. I had no one to talk to, no one to confide in, no one to defend me. My parents lived far away, and I didn't dare complain because I knew they would be helpless. Society would only blame me, ask me to adjust, remind me that a good woman suffers quietly. So I suffered quietly. And in that silence, something inside me began to break, slowly and painfully, like a thread being pulled apart, fibre by fibre. But the worst moment, the moment that still wakes me up sometimes at night, even at this age, came in my 8th month. My belly had grown heavy. My ankles were swollen. My breath came in small, shallow gulps. I was sweeping the floor because she insisted it be done before sunrise. The room suddenly spun around me. The walls looked like they were tilting. I placed a hand on my stomach and tried to steady myself, but the dizziness was too strong. I remember the exact second my body gave out. My legs buckled. The broom slipped from my hand. I fell sideways onto the cold, hard floor, my vision blurring, my heart pounding painfully. I called out her name, not out of trust, but out of desperation. She appeared in the doorway, and she didn't move. She just stood there, watching me. I gasped, trying to pull myself up, but my hand slipped. My head hit the ground again. My belly throbbed violently. I was terrified, not for myself, but for the tiny life inside me. I begged her, my voice shaking, "Please, help me." She tilted her head slightly, as if considering it, and then simply said, "You should be more careful," before walking away, leaving me on the floor while I struggled to breathe. If anyone asks me what cruelty looks like, I will tell them it looks like that moment. When a woman chooses to walk away from another woman in pain, not because she cannot help, but because she doesn't want to. It took me several minutes to crawl to the bed, using whatever strength I had left. My stomach was tight, too tight. I was terrified I had harmed my baby. Tears streamed down my face, and I rocked back and forth, whispering, "Please be safe. Please be safe, my little one. Please hold on." I don't know how long I stayed like that, but eventually the pain eased, and the baby moved, just a little. A small kick, a reassuring sign that he was still with me, still fighting. That night, when my husband returned home, she told him I had fallen because I was careless, because I was clumsy, because I didn't know how to take care of myself. And he believed her. Again. Without asking me, without seeing the fear in my eyes. But something changed inside me after that fall. A spark of strength I didn't know I possessed began to grow. Slowly, quietly, like a seed breaking through the soil after a long winter. I decided that I would not allow myself to be destroyed. Not by her, not by him, not by the world that expected me to stay silent. And that strength would protect my son. Strength is a strange thing, my dear. It doesn't arrive like a storm, loud and sudden. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed, slipping into your heart like a whisper. After that fall, when I lay on the floor helpless and alone, something inside me hardened. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was something deeper. A decision. A realization that if I didn't protect myself and the child growing inside me, no one else would. And once a mother decides to protect her child, she becomes capable of surviving the sharpest cruelty. But strength does not erase suffering. It only allows you to endure it without losing yourself completely. As my belly grew heavier, her actions grew sharper. I remember mornings when she would sit with my husband at the breakfast table, laughing as if they shared a private world. She touched his arm in a way that made my stomach twist. Sometimes she would glance at me with a soft smile, the kind that carried poison beneath its sweetness. She wanted me to see. She wanted me to feel small. And my husband, he allowed it. Perhaps he didn't understand the game she played. Or perhaps he did, and didn't care. I stopped expecting him to defend me. I stopped expecting him to notice the tears I wiped away quietly, the tremble in my hands, the exhaustion in my steps. His love, or whatever love I thought existed, was slipping away, leaving behind a cold void that I filled with my baby's heartbeat. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, but I forced myself to stand, forced myself to work, forced myself to endure. Because she watched me, constantly, waiting for me to show weakness so she could twist it into a story, twist it into another complaint for my husband. Sometimes, late at night, I would feel my baby moving inside me, and I would press my hands to my belly and whisper, "You are my hope. You are my courage. We will survive this together." And those small kicks became my anchor, the only warmth in a house that had grown cold. One afternoon, in my 9th month, when my back felt like it was splitting and every step sent a wave of pain up my spine, she entered my room unannounced. She sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers tapping rhythmically on her knee, her eyes scanning me with a strange curiosity. "You look tired," she said, pretending concern. "Maybe you should rest more, or maybe—" She paused, her gaze settling on my swollen belly. "Maybe the child is taking too much from you." There was something unsettling in the way she said it, something that made my skin crawl. I shifted uncomfortably, trying to adjust my pillow, but she leaned closer. "You know," she continued, "a woman should keep her husband happy, even when she's pregnant. That's why he spends more time with me. I understand him. I give him what he needs." Her words hit me like a slap, but I didn't react. I had learned by then that reacting only fed her cruelty. So I just stared at her silently, my face blank, my heart steady. She didn't like that. Her lips tightened, and she rose from the bed abruptly. "Remember your place," she said quietly, her voice dripping with frustration. "You are not the only wife here." And she left. I placed a hand on my belly, feeling my baby twist gently, as if sensing my distress. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, deeply, reminding myself that soon, very soon, I would hold my child in my arms. That thought gave me peace. For a moment. But peace never lasted long in that house. As the days passed, rumors spread in the neighborhood. Little whispers that reached me through hushed voices of distant relatives. They said the second wife was telling people that I was unstable, that I was too emotional, that I was not ready for motherhood. She painted herself as the practical, sensible one, the one who kept the house running, the one who supported my husband. And me? She made me seem like a burden. One evening, when my stomach felt heavy as a stone, I overheard her speaking to my husband in the courtyard. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was simply too tired to move quickly, and their voices floated to me through the quiet night. "She cries all the time," she said, her voice dripping with innocent concern. "I think she's not mentally strong. I try to help her, but she pushes me away. She even told me she doesn't want me near the baby once he's born." I froze. I had never said such a thing, not even once. But my husband believed her. I heard him sigh, heard the frustration in his voice, heard him say, "I don't know what to do with her anymore." And something inside me, something fragile and hopeful, died quietly in that moment. I returned to my room, sat on the bed, and stayed still for a long time. The baby moved inside me, a gentle flutter, and I whispered, "I'm here, my love. I'm still here. Mama is still strong." But silently, in the depths of my heart, I felt the cracks widening. It was only a week later when the labor pains began. The first wave hit me like a tightening fist. I was alone in the room, trying to fold clothes, when I felt the pain seize my stomach. I grabbed the edge of the bed, my breath trembling. I knew the moment had come. My baby was ready. I called out for help. She entered first, her face unreadable, her eyes scanning me like I was a problem she didn't want to deal with. I think it's time," I whispered, barely able to speak through the pain. She stared at me for a moment, too long, and then, without a word, she walked away. I heard her footsteps fade. I heard her voice calling my husband, but in a tone that lacked urgency. Another contraction hit me, stronger, sharper. I bent forward, gripping the edge of the bed, gasping for air. Minutes passed, no one came. I called again, louder this time, tears streaming down my face. The pain was becoming unbearable. My body felt like it was tearing open, and all I wanted was someone, anyone, to help me. Finally, my husband rushed into the room. His face showed surprise, confusion, and then panic. He called for assistance. Someone fetched the midwife. The house became chaotic. She stood in the corner, watching everything with an expression I couldn't understand. Part annoyance, part curiosity, part something darker. The contractions grew closer, stronger, relentless. I screamed, I cried, I begged for strength. Hours passed, long, painful hours that felt like eternity. And then finally, after a final push that drained every ounce of life from my body, I heard the first cry. A tiny, beautiful cry. My son, my baby boy. The midwife placed him on my chest, and I felt his warm, soft body against mine. Tears spilled down my face, not of pain but of overwhelming love. In that moment, everything else disappeared. Her cruelty, my husband's neglect, the loneliness, the suffering. None of it mattered. I held him close, whispered his name, kissed his forehead over and over. He was small but strong, delicate yet full of life. But even that sacred moment, she tried to poison. She stepped forward, her voice falsely gentle, and said, "Let me hold him." I hesitated. My instincts screamed no, but my husband insisted, saying, "She's part of this family too." And just like that, my baby, my only source of light, was taken from my arms and placed into hers. The way she held him, it wasn't love, it wasn't tenderness, it was possession. As if she wanted to challenge me even in motherhood, as if she wanted to show me that nothing, not even my child, belonged fully to me. But she didn't know one thing. This child was my strength. And a mother's strength is not something that can be taken, not by cruelty, not by lies, not by anyone. When they placed my son into her arms, I felt a strange chill ripple through me, as if the room itself had dimmed. She held him the way someone holds a fragile ornament, not warmly, not protectively, but with a calculating sort of carefulness. Her fingers were stiff, her posture too straight, her eyes too focused, as if she were studying him rather than cradling him. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I wanted to reach forward, to take him back, to press him against my body again where he belonged, but my limbs were weak, trembling from the long hours of labor. I could barely sit upright, and so I watched helplessly as she lifted him slightly, as if evaluating something only she could understand. My husband stood beside her, smiling, admiring the baby with a pride I hadn't seen in him for months. The sight made my throat tighten. For a brief moment I wanted him to look at me with that same softness, to hold my hand and say he was proud of me. But that moment never came. His eyes were on the baby and on her, never on me. I tried to speak, tried to say, "Please, give him back," but my voice cracked before the words reached my lips. She glanced at me, one eyebrow raised ever so slightly, as if she enjoyed seeing me powerless. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, she handed the baby back. But her expression carried a message I understood clearly. He may be your child, but this house is mine. When the midwife finally left, the house settled into a strange silence. The lamps flickered softly against the walls, casting long shadows that made the room feel colder than it already was. My son lay in my arms, wrapped tightly in a thin cloth, his tiny breaths brushing against my skin. I stared at his face for what felt like hours. He had my nose, my mouth, even the small curve of my chin. His eyelids fluttered dreamily, and I wondered what kind of world he would grow up in. Would he know love? Would he know safety? Would he grow up seeing the pain I tried so hard to hide? I promised him then, quietly, silently, that no matter what happened, I would protect him, even if I had to break myself entirely to do so. It was late in the evening when the second wife returned to my room, carrying a bowl of soup. Her steps were light, polite, almost graceful, but I could sense the sharpness beneath her softness. "You should eat," she said, placing the bowl beside me. "You need strength." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes betrayed her. They held something cold, something distant, something that felt too practiced to be genuine. I didn't touch the soup. I simply stared at it. My son stirred in my arms, and I adjusted his blanket, ignoring her presence. She watched me for a long time, longer than necessary, her gaze tracing my every movement. At last, she spoke again. "A baby changes everything," she murmured. "Let's see if it changes him." The way she said it made my stomach twist, but I didn't respond. I had learned then that silence was sometimes my only weapon. She waited a few seconds more, then left the room, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. That night, when the house fell silent, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just soft, quiet tears that slipped down my cheeks as I held my son against me. Every sob felt like it carried months of fear, pain, and loneliness. My chest ached with the weight of everything I had endured. But even through the tears, I looked at my son and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Tiny, fragile hope. He was my light, my strength, my reason to keep breathing. I pressed my lips against his forehead, whispering, "You are mine. You are my blessing. And I will never let anyone take you away from me." But life does not allow hope to stay gentle for long. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, aching limbs, and endless responsibilities. My body was weak from childbirth, but I pushed myself to stand, to walk, to care for my newborn. She watched me every day, waiting for a mistake, waiting for me to stumble. And every time my husband left the house, she would enter the room with helpfulness painted on her face like a mask. "Let me hold him," she would say, reaching for my son with outstretched hands. Sometimes I refused politely, using the excuse that he had just fallen asleep or just finished feeding. Other times, when my strength gave out, I had no choice but to let her take him. But even then, I kept my eyes on her, watching her closely. She wasn't malicious toward the baby. Not exactly. But she carried him like a symbol, like a victory she wanted to display. And gradually, slowly, she began to insert herself into his life in small, subtle ways. She would bring him clothes, saying, "I thought this would look cute." She would buy toys, saying, "Babies need stimulation." She would tell my husband, "He smiled at me today. It felt special." Every gesture seemed harmless on the surface, but I could see her intentions. She wanted my baby to love her. She wanted my husband to praise her. She wanted the entire household to see her as the more capable mother. One afternoon, while I was struggling to rock my son to sleep, she entered the room with a calm smile. "Let me do it," she said softly. "You look so tired." I shook my head. "He'll sleep soon." "You don't have to do everything alone," she insisted, stepping closer. "Sometimes you need help." But her eyes, they weren't offering help. They were offering control. I held my son closer, my heart pounding. "He's fine with me," I whispered. Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, irritation, maybe even anger. But she masked it quickly. With a forced smile, she stepped back. "As you wish," she said, and left the room. I let out a shaky breath, relieved, but I knew that wasn't the end. Not even close. At night, when the house grew still, I would lie awake with my baby sleeping beside me, listening to the faint murmurs of voices from the hallway. Sometimes I heard her talking to my husband, her voice gentle and persuasive. Other times I heard him sigh heavily, as if weighed down by responsibilities he didn't know how to manage. I wanted to hate him. Truly I did. But a part of me still longed for him. Still remembered the early days when I believed he would be the one to hold my hand through life. Still wished he would look at me and see the pain beneath my silence. But he didn't. Not then. Not when I needed him most. As weeks passed, exhaustion became my constant companion. The baby cried through the nights, and my body hurt in places I didn't know could hurt. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My head throbbed constantly. Yet I forced myself to stay strong, to keep going, to hold my son close even when my arms ached. She, of course, made sure everyone knew how overwhelmed I was. "She doesn't rest enough," she would tell the family. "She gets emotional so easily." I try to help, but she pushes me away. Lies woven with just enough truth to sound believable. And my husband, he listened. One evening, when the baby had finally fallen asleep and I was sitting on the bed, rubbing my swollen ankles, he walked into the room. He looked tired, his eyes dull, his expression unreadable. "She says you're not letting her help," he said bluntly. I froze. "She says you act like she's the enemy." Enemy. The word drifted through the air like a bitter taste. I looked up at him, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you expect me to do? Hand my son to her every time she asks?" "She's your sister wife," he said. "This is supposed to be a family." A family? A cruel laugh almost escaped me, but I swallowed it down. If this was family, then pain was love. He sighed heavily, shaking his head as if I were the problem, and walked out. I held my face in my hands and cried quietly, so quietly that even my own baby didn't stir. My tears soaked into my palms, into the blanket, into my heart. But even in that moment of weakness, I whispered to myself, Be strong. For him. And I knew I had no choice. Because soon, her cruelty would take a darker turn, and I would face the greatest test of my life. And after that night, something inside me finally cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a quiet thread snapping somewhere deep in my chest. I woke up the next morning feeling heavier than the baby inside me, heavier than the blankets, heavier than the entire house itself. It was a kind of heaviness that settled in my bones, a weight that whispers, "You are disappearing, and nobody is noticing." I remember sitting on the side of the bed for what felt like hours, staring at my own feet, swollen and tired, thinking how strange it was that the world kept spinning while I was stuck in place, trapped inside a life that wasn't mine anymore. When I finally stood up, a sharp ache ran up my spine, and I thought it was normal pregnancy pain. But later I realized it was grief. Grief has a way of disguising itself as many things. I walked out into the corridor and heard Maria humming softly in the kitchen. Her hum always made me uneasy. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't even calming. It sounded like someone pretending to be happy, someone practicing joy like a speech they had memorized but didn't understand. I thought about ignoring her, like I usually did, but something pushed me into the kitchen anyway. Maybe I wanted to reclaim my home. Maybe I wanted her to see that I still existed. Maybe a small, foolish part of me hoped she would be kinder today. She wasn't. Her back was turned to me, but when she heard my footsteps, she glanced over with that same cold smirk she wore like makeup. She didn't greet me. Instead, she looked at my stomach, then at the pan she was cooking in, and said, "You should eat less. You're already too big. It's not good for the baby." The way she said the baby as though it didn't belong to me made my throat tighten. I stood there silently, feeling the sting of her words sinking into me like needles. She continued humming as if she had said nothing cruel at all. That was her talent. Hurting people with a smile, bruising souls without raising her voice. I turned around and walked away before she saw the tears building in my eyes. I didn't want her to have that satisfaction. The hallway felt colder than usual that day. Even the windows seemed dimmer. I placed my hand on my belly, whispering softly to my unborn child, as I had started doing every morning. "You're safe," I told him, even though I wasn't. "You're mine," I told him, even though the world around me wanted to take everything from me. "And I will protect you," I promised, though I had no idea how. It was the only comfort I had left. Talking to him, imagining him listening, imagining one day he would understand just how much he saved me before he was even born. I went outside to the small courtyard behind the house. The air was cool, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. I sat on the old wooden bench my husband had built years ago, before everything changed. Before Maria arrived. Before he stopped looking at me the way he once did. Before I became a shadow in my own marriage. The bench creaked softly under my weight, and I closed my eyes, letting the breeze touch my cheeks gently, like the way he used to. I often wondered where that man went. The man who wrote me letters, who brought me flowers, who held my hands when storms frightened me. He vanished the day he brought her into our home, smiling like he was offering me a gift instead of a betrayal. I heard footsteps behind me. Light footsteps. Her footsteps. Even before she spoke, I felt the shift in the air, the tension, the intrusion, the way peace evaporates the moment cruelty enters the room. I didn't turn. I was too tired. But she came anyway, standing beside the bench with a plate in her hand. "Eat this," she said sharply, placing the plate next to me as if she was feeding a stray dog. I looked at the food. It was a single slice of bread, nothing else. No butter, no tea, nothing. She had cooked a full breakfast for herself and my husband, but for me, this. I wanted to ask why, but questions were useless with her. She never answered honestly anyway. I pushed the plate away, not violently, just enough to show I wasn't going to let her control me today. She didn't like that. Her eyes narrowed, and her fake smile stretched thin like cracked porcelain. "Suit yourself," she said. "Starve, then." She turned around and walked back inside the house with a slight swing in her hips, as though she had won something. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't refusing the food out of pride. I simply couldn't swallow anything anymore. Fear had taken over my stomach. Loneliness had taken over my appetite. The rest of the morning passed quietly, but not peacefully. Silence in that house was never peaceful. It was the kind of silence that watches you, waits for you to break, waits for you to cry so it can echo the sound of your sadness back at you. I sat there on the bench for a long time, rubbing my belly, feeling small movements under my skin. Those little kicks were the only reminder that life was still inside me, growing, fighting, trusting me. I had to be strong for him. I repeated it to myself like a prayer. Be strong, be strong, be strong. By noon, my husband finally came home. He looked tired, or maybe I was just tired of looking at him. He walked past me without stopping, without asking if I had eaten, without noticing the tears drying on my face. He acted as though I were invisible. I followed him inside, hoping he would at least look at me, at least ask if his unborn child was well. When I reached the living room, I saw Maria placing her hands gently on his shoulders, leaning in close, whispering something that made him smile. Smile. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. My heart tightened painfully, and I felt a pressure in my chest so strong I thought I might faint. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to tell him everything she had been doing to me. But the fear of him not believing me, of him choosing her over me, kept my mouth shut. Silence became my cage, but what I didn't know then, what I couldn't even imagine, was that everything was about to get much worse, much colder, much crueler. Because Maria wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to break me completely. The moment I sensed things would get worse was not dramatic, not loud, not something you'd see in a movie. It was a tiny moment. Tiny, but sharp enough to cut through me. It happened that same afternoon, only an hour after my husband walked in. I was sitting near the window, breathing slowly, trying to calm my baby who had been kicking relentlessly, as if he could feel my fear. The window was slightly open, letting in a faint breeze carrying the smell of dust and distant rain. I closed my eyes and listened to the faint heartbeat inside me, letting my hand rest protectively on my belly. Then I heard them. Not arguing, not whispering sweetly, not even discussing chores. They were planning something. I only heard fragments because they were in the next room, but I heard enough to freeze the breath in my chest. Maria's voice was low and sharp. His voice was uncertain, defensive. The kind of defensive men use when they know they're wrong, but don't want to admit it. "I'm telling you," she said, her tone thin and vicious. "She's becoming a problem." My blood turned cold. A problem? Me? The wife carrying his child? The woman who had loved him long before she ever existed? He muttered something I couldn't hear. Something tired, something weak. And she answered quickly, "If she continues like this, things will get dangerous. For her. For the baby." I held my breath so tightly my lungs ached. Why was she talking about danger? What did she mean? Why was my husband not defending me? I leaned slightly forward, trying not to make any sound, but the wooden floor creaked under my weight. I froze. Their voices stopped. Silence spread through the house like smoke. For a moment, I thought they heard me. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard, the baby shifted as if startled. I pressed my back into the chair, praying they would continue talking. Because silence meant secrets, and secrets meant danger. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Coming toward my room. I barely had time to wipe the panic off my face before Maria appeared in the doorway. She leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, arms crossed, wearing that same cruel little smile she always wore when she knew she had the advantage. "Are you comfortable?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. It felt like she was asking a prisoner in a cell if they were enjoying their chains. I forced a small nod. "I'm fine." She stepped into the room, making sure her footsteps were slow and loud, like she wanted to imprint her presence into every corner of my space. She walked right up to me, too close, close enough that I could smell the perfume my husband had once bought for me. The same bottle that mysteriously went missing months ago. "You know," she said softly, tracing her finger along the edge of my chair, "pregnant women can be very fragile." She looked at my belly with a smile that wasn't a smile. "Accidents happen." My heart dropped so harshly I felt dizzy. My arms instinctively wrapped around my stomach. I didn't even think. It was instinct, pure instinct, the way a mother shields her baby from a predator. She noticed, and she liked it. She smirked wider and leaned down, her voice now a whisper so cold it chilled the air around us. "Start behaving," she murmured, "or you might lose more than your husband." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I didn't breathe. She walked away casually, humming that same pretend happy tune as if she hadn't just threatened me and my unborn child. When she left the room, the walls felt like they were closing in. The air grew thicker. My vision blurred at the edges. I reached for the armrest, gripping it until my knuckles turned white. My baby shifted inside me, almost in protest, almost as if he felt my fear. And for the first time in my life, I prayed not for myself, but for him. Because I realized in that moment, I wasn't living with a jealous woman. I wasn't living with a selfish second wife. I was living with someone who wanted me gone. And my husband was letting it happen. When Maria walked out of that room, the entire house felt poisoned. Every corner, every wall, every breath carried her presence. I sat there for a long time, frozen, trying to understand how my life had reached a point where I feared the very place I once called home. I had married a man who once promised to protect me, but now I found myself protecting our unborn son from him and the woman he allowed into our lives. I felt trapped between walls that no longer offered shelter, and a future that looked more dangerous than anything behind me. But something shifted in me that day. Not loudly, not suddenly, but with a quiet, bitter clarity. I realized that if I stayed in that house, if I tolerated one more day, one more threat, one more smirk from her cold face, I might not survive long enough to hold my child. And if I died, my son would be raised by a woman who hated me, who saw him as nothing more than a reminder that she was not the first wife. The thought made my breath catch, made my heart roar inside my chest. I couldn't let that happen. I wouldn't. So that night, when the house finally grew quiet and the lamps were blown out one by one, I made my decision. The moonlight crept in through the curtains, casting the room in a pale glow. I sat on the edge of the bed, stroking my belly slowly as tears slid silently down my cheeks. I whispered to my son again, but this time it wasn't a prayer, it was a promise. "I'm taking you away from here," I said. "Somewhere safe, somewhere far. I don't care what it costs. We will live, the two of us, even if I have to leave everything behind." My heart was breaking, but a new strength was rising beneath the cracks. I waited until I heard my husband snoring from down the hallway, a sound I had once found comforting, but now it only felt like chains dragging across the floor. I waited even longer until I heard Maria's light footsteps fade into stillness. When the entire house seemed asleep, I slowly stood up, my belly heavy, my breath shallow. Every movement hurt, but every step mattered. I packed slowly, carefully, Just a small bag, only the things that belonged to me alone. A few clothes, some money I had secretly saved, a tiny handmade blanket I had sewn for my baby, and a little wooden toy my father had carved for me when I was a child, the only piece of my past that still held warmth. I wrapped it gently and placed it in the bag as if it were a part of my soul. Then came the hardest part. I opened the bedroom door. The hallway stretched long and dark, lit only by thin lines of moonlight. My heart was pounding so loudly I feared it would wake someone. I walked slowly, pressing one hand against the wall for balance. Halfway down the corridor, the floor creaked, the same creak Maria had heard earlier that day. I froze, swallowing hard, my eyes fixed on the shadow beneath her door. No movement, no sound. I forced myself to breathe again and continued moving until I reached the front door. My hands trembled violently as I unlatched the lock. The door made the softest click, but to me it sounded like thunder. I paused again, waiting, listening. Silence. I stepped outside. The night air was cool and sharp, touching my skin like freedom. The sky was clear, a deep, endless blue scattered with stars. I looked at them and thought of my mother, who had always told me, "Whenever you feel alone, look up. Someone you love is looking back at you." I didn't feel alone anymore. I walked down the road slowly at first, then faster as my fear turned into determination. Every step carried the weight of my future, the future of my son. The houses around me were dark and quiet, and for the first time in months I felt like I was breathing clean air again. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but I knew where I wasn't staying. I walked until my legs shook from exhaustion, until the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. And then, by some miracle of fate, I reached the small cottage where my older sister lived, the one I had lost touch with after my marriage, the one I had been too proud to return to, the one who had always warned me about trusting too blindly. When she opened the door and saw me standing there, pale, swollen, trembling, she didn't ask questions. She didn't scold. She didn't judge. She simply wrapped her arms around me and held me as I cried into her shoulder, whispering, "I'm here. You're safe now. You're safe." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed those words. The weeks that followed were painful but healing. I told her everything, every cruelty, every fear, every moment I had swallowed instead of speaking. And she listened. She helped me regain my strength, fed me properly, made me rest, talked to me gently whenever I woke up shaking from nightmares of Maria's voice whispering, "Accidents happen." My baby grew stronger with every passing day. And so did I. When the time finally came, on a warm morning filled with birdsong and sunlight flooding through the windows, I gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. The moment I held him in my arms, his tiny fingers curling around mine, every ounce of suffering I had endured transformed into strength, into purpose, into love so powerful it felt like a fire burning through all the shadows of my past. I looked at his little face, still pink from the world he had just entered, and I whispered, "We survived. You and I, we survived them." My sister cried with joy. The room felt full of warmth, full of new beginnings. And for the first time since my husband brought Maria into our lives, I felt like myself again, reborn, just as my son was. I never went back to that house, not even once. My husband searched for me, I heard. He came by my sister's home twice, pleading, apologizing, swearing he didn't know how bad things were. But by then, my heart had learned a truth I wish I had known sooner. A man who allows your suffering is as guilty as the one who causes it. I shut the door on him and on that life forever. And now, as an old woman telling you this story, sitting in my rocking chair, with a soft blanket over my knees and the memories of that time resting heavily in my mind, I look at the life I built on my own. Painful, yes, but peaceful, honest, Safe. My son grew up kind, strong, loyal. He became a man I'm proud of every single day. And he never had to grow up under the shadow of a woman who wanted him gone before he was even born. So when you ask me why I call those days the worst time of my life, it's because they taught me something brutal and important. Survival sometimes means walking away from the people you love. And strength isn't loud. It's quiet. It's lonely. It's the sound of a pregnant woman opening a door in the middle of the night, choosing her child over her fear. I survived. My son survived. And that is the story I wanted to leave behind.